Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Cartersville, Georgia, Tuesday, December 10th, 2024.
Cartersville High School cheerleaders are speaking out about a hate crime targeting them. Someone wrote the N-word and other obscenities in their cheer room and also ruined their uniforms. Police have made an arrest. Channel 2's Taisha Fernandez went to Cartersville to ask the cheer squad what they think is behind this crime.
The cheerleaders said this whole incident made them mad instead of being sad. And they said what made them feel so upset about it was that it wasn't just the racial slur. It was the personal attack on their uniforms that were not cheap.
What's the reason behind it, you know?
These two students are cheerleaders at Cartersville High School, and they were upset about what happened in their cheerleading room Tuesday. Someone spray painted the N-word on their refrigerator and ruined their uniforms by pouring mustard and coffee creamer on them.
We already have like a negative image on us just because we are a mostly black team. So it's just kind of like, you know, it made everybody mad. Even we have 15 black girls and one white girl that made her mad too.
Police ended up arresting a minor for it, but the cheer coach didn't like the way the situation was handled. Cheerleaders had to look at this again when they got to school the next morning. A spokesperson for Cartersville City Schools says miscommunication was the problem because administrators began their investigation immediately. They said, quote, the joint investigation with Cartersville Police concluded within 24 hours on early afternoon Wednesday with the arrest of a juvenile. Cartersville City Schools does not tolerate any actions that make our students and staff feel unsafe. She went on to say they couldn't clean up this mess because it was an active crime scene. These girls hope that student gets more than just suspension.
You know, when something like this happens, we get a whole lot of people who decide that they want to talk about their thoughts and feelings. When something of this nature occurs, that's not the time for thoughts and feelings. That's people who want to make it all about themselves. Now, we can be disgusted by this incident, but don't you dare act surprised. I'm a Gen Xer. And that's significant to this because mine is the first generation born after the Civil Rights Movement, the first generation born after the alleged end of job discrimination, after the alleged end of voting discrimination, after the alleged end of housing discrimination, but most importantly, after the alleged end of segregated schools. In fact, that last point was one that had to be touted since the 1950s with Brown versus Board of Education, but that was a decade before the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts of the 1960s. And yet, how much progress was there when it came to equal education in that 10-year period, or in the 70 years since? As a Gen Xer, I grew up watching TV shows and movies like everyone else, mostly TV shows that depicted children of all colors getting an education in a multiracial setting. And I also watched as millennials were being spoon-fed the same propaganda. Everything from Saved by the Bell to Power Rangers to after school and Saturday morning cartoons. Everywhere you look, the white media was pushing that imagery. The TV shows and movies and the white media's so-called news is nothing more than propaganda whose purpose is to bestow innocence on this racist society by claiming, see, we've changed. We're not racist anymore. Why, look at this TV show with all these different races of kids and this TV show and this news show. But their phony claims of black representation is merely for show. The illusion of multiracial schools is the number one way the U.S. has tried to push the lie that it's changed its tune since the 1960s. Because, of course, what better yardstick would you measure the improvement of a society by than its children? And you would be right to actually use that measurement, because while in black homes we had been taught to be colorblind and judge people by their character and not their color, we noticed soon enough that wasn't what was being taught in the homes of our classmates. They were being taught exactly the opposite. And as for the teachers and principals at these schools, in their sick minds, Jim Crow never went away. And forget about separate but equal. To them, it was separate and unequal. And these are the individuals who black children were being taught, or rather not taught by. Even as a Gen Xer, it quickly became apparent that no matter what we were shown on TV, no matter the allegedly multiracial classrooms we were in that the government said were apparently colorblind now, our classmates' parents hadn't changed their minds one bit about their attitudes regarding race. And it was these parents who were the main ones saying they wanted to homeschool their kids all of a sudden, even though most of these parents barely passed school themselves. But mainly, if possible, they wanted to get their kids out of public schools and into private schools. And of course, the government was bending over backwards to make sure that they funded it, but only for white neighborhoods. And it wasn't so much about getting a higher quality education as it was that, just like Joe Biden said in the 1970s, they considered it an insult to their racial status that their children should be in the same schools as black children at all. And we saw that attitude manifest itself in their children. There had already been a number of school shootings that had taken place in the 1980s and into the 90s, but at the end of that decade, America had its first grade school massacre, Columbine. It wasn't a mass shooting where one person was killed and 10 injured. It was a mass killing. I feel like I have to point that out because the white media loves to conflate the two as if they both mean the same thing, but they don't. Now, what doesn't get reported about the atrocity at Columbine was that Klebold and Harris were also on a white supremacist rampage that day. In fact, their associations and affinity for white nationalist culture is something that never gets mentioned except by the black media. They listen to that kind of Nazi rock crap that white supremacists are into, among other things. Klebold and Harris were part of a clique of bizarre oddballs at Columbine who became known as the Trenchcoat Mafia due to the fact that they wore their trench coats year-round, even in class. But that wasn't the only odd attire they wore. They also wore military berets, combat boots, red shoelaces, and Confederate flag patches. Gee, sounds just like Dylan Roof, another young mass murderer now, doesn't it? And the Trenchcoat Mafia's red shoelaces are important to note because that's what white supremacists like to wear, red shoelaces to symbolize that they had shed blood for the cause. The area of Colorado that Klebold and Harris lived in had very few black people, and their high school had practically none at all. Yet during their mass murder spree, Klebold and Harris singled out the only black student they could find, a young man named Isaiah Shoals. According to witnesses, one of the gunmen screamed, "There's that little nigger SOB right there," just before they gunned him down. Now, that wording clearly indicates that not only were they looking for black students to kill, but that they had been looking for Isaiah Shoals in particular. As it turns out, Isaiah Shoals and his siblings, who also attended Columbine, had had previous run-ins with the Trenchcoat Mafia. Isaiah's father recounted that several months earlier, one of the Trenchcoat Mafia had picked a fight with Isaiah. Now, Isaiah was only 4'11" and 120 pounds, but he had made the school's football, wrestling, and weightlifting teams. According to Isaiah's father, his son and this member of the Trenchcoat Mafia came to blows, and given that these reprobates were still angry about it several months later, I think it's safe to say who won that fight. But Isaiah's sister reported having been racially harassed by some girl thought to have been dating one of the Trenchcoat Mafia members. So this is why on the day of the massacre, they spoke with clear recognition when they saw Isaiah Shoals, because they couldn't beat him in a fight, and as we know, white supremacists hate to take an L. This is the part of the Columbine massacre that the white media doesn't tell you about. But the racial violence and hostility in America's schools certainly didn't stop there. We get subjected on a near daily basis to yet another accounting of some violent incident where underage white supremacists harass and often violently attack black students. In 2015, you had 2 white girls who decided to celebrate their school's Spirit Week by wearing shirts with the N-word on them. Now, they claimed they were doing it because it was rap lyrics that they were quoting, but notice how none of these little racist music lovers ever uses verses or lyrics that denigrate white people. For some reason, they don't ever see those as being eminently quotable, not very popular with them, it seems. The year after that, there was an incident where white female high schoolers thought it funny to use their shirts to spell out the N-word and then post it online. Gee, no rappers that they could mention? Something about female students in racist shirts, I suppose. Last year, you had that incident at Shawnee Mission East High School in Kansas where a white male student, unprovoked, beat a black girl so badly she had to be hospitalized, and the school bent over backwards trying to take the side of this violent thug who attacked that child. The students at the school staged a walkout because that incident was only one of many that routinely happen at that school. The kids have been complaining about racism there for years, but the school administrators made it a point to protect those hate criminals. From Columbine to the present, these incidents are an accurate reflection of what's been taught in America's homes for the dominant society since the 1960s. This is what every generation of black Americans since the late 60s has experienced in what is supposed to be a now colorblind, multiracial society. Why is there still racism in America? Because the dominant society is still teaching it to their children in their homes and protecting that racism outside their homes. Black students are constantly under attack, and black parents have to make it a point to not merely show up after some racist incident has occurred, but also to be proactive, to stop these hate criminals before they attack. In every single case of racial harassment or violence against black students, be it in schools or even universities, there is always some number of attacks and overtly hostile acts by the perpetrators that preceded it. These incidents never come out of the blue. School faculty and administrators protect these anti-black racists before they pull their heinous crimes, but they only do something about it if it makes the news, and even then, they work to protect these criminals from punishment afterwards. They're always told about these people in advance. They're never just individuals who, oh my God, we didn't even know that they were like this. There's always a track record. These little white supremacists in training know this. They've been conditioned by this society to expect that they'll never be punished because 99% of the time they aren't. This society conditions them to understand that attacking black people is a victimless crime. It's a sanctioned act of violence sanctioned by the state. They are not merely allowed to partake in white supremacist subcultures, they are encouraged to do so, and this encouragement comes in the home. Now, all this summer we heard phony outrage about anti-Semitism on college campuses, merely because someone might have had a Palestinian flag lapel pin, or someone dared to say stop bombing Gaza. The white media would go into breathless hysterics over that. For months on end, we've been told that the whole world had to stop spinning on its axis because AIPAC, the ADL, or Alan Dershowitz claimed that Jewish students didn't feel safe because someone claimed that they heard somebody say, "Don't bomb Gaza." Same way that there was an orgy of white media hysteria about Asian hate crimes in 2020. The largest demonstrations in living memory because of the police murders of black people. A black man's murder was the reason for all of that. Black people being the overwhelming majority of hate crimes victims, as we are every year. And yet the white media completely overlooked that and said that there needs to be resources and attentions devoted to Asian hate crimes instead. And that's why black people are the majority of hate crimes victims in America, because there's an organized and deliberate program of anti-black racism at work, and it is constantly and hyper-aggressively enforced, not just by the government, not just by the white media, but also in these homes. Ever since Ethan Crumbley carried out his mass murder in Michigan, people have been asking when are parents going to be made to face consequences for the behavior of their children. Well, I'd like to see people demanding when the parents of these anti-black racists face punishment for what their children do. Black parents must make the connection between anti-black racism in schools and the necessity to penalize these parents. No more of this only doing something or usually acting like they're going to do something, only if the incident makes the news. Black parents must make this an issue. Nobody else is going to do it. And yes, of course there's going to be heavy opposition to this because the school administrators and these school board members are the very perpetrators and enablers of these anti-black racists. Being able to act without restriction is one of the benefits the white power bestows on those it classifies as white. Police do not impede their movements or harass them just because, and whenever they commit crimes or what have you, they're unlikely to face any penalties for it unless it makes the news, and even then it usually gets quietly disposed of. Black children are not supposed to be anyone's targets, but black parents have to start being consistent again about making sure our children are safe. A lot of black people speculate on the possibility of running for public office. One place you can start is with your local school board. Sure, it's not as sexy as, say, the city council or the mayor's office or Congress, but it does give you the ability to enter the political ecosystem. And more importantly, it gives you practice at exercising authority over these white supremacists. That's always worth it at any level. We've seen how the white right has been allowed to misuse school boards in order to push their anti-black crackpot ideology. Well, I think it's way past time there were some black people who got in there and gave these racists and their degenerate, bigoted brats a real education. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Maurice Soul, Jamail Howard, DSC Bland, Gordon Gates, and Richard Mitchell. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.